Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at a very unique South African production semi-automatic open bolt integrally suppressed carbine. This is a TS5, which stands for Tommy Steele, number 5. Tommy Steele is one of the kind of more colorful characters in the story of Rhodesian and South African firearms design. He actually started off as an armorer or an engineer with the British military, and ended up fleeing to Rhodesia for reasons that are vague, but I'm sure colorful, and joined the Rhodesian Army, where he served as an armorer. Eventually went from Rhodesia to South Africa, where he again served as an armorer in the South African Defense Forces. And during this whole time, he was also involved in designing and developing his own firearms. So earliest in the story, in the late 1970s, he was involved in the development of the Cobra Carbine that was manufactured by Stellite, which was the Stell part of that name was from Steele, his own name. And then after that project, he got into his own series of guns independently, which was the TS series. So there was a TS 1, 2, 3, 4, and eventually 5. None of these really went into any substantial production, and by the TS5, the design originally dates to about 1986 with this. The 5s were actually produced in 1996 and 1997. There were only 5 of these guns ever actually made, and this is the first of them. They are heavy, they're kind of bulky, but they actually have a number of interesting features to them. There's some kind of cool stuff going on here. So let me go ahead and show you that. So where to even start on this? I think we'll start with the controls. There's a safety lever on the side. Down is safe, up is fire. That's pretty simple. There's also a grip safety built into the front of the pistol grip. And if you have not depressed the grip safety, you cannot use the charging handle. So once you grip that, then you can open the bolt. This fires from an open bolt, but it has a non-reciprocating spring-loaded charging handle. You'll notice it has an ejection port here, and also an ejection port here. You can actually configure this to eject out of either the left or the right side, which is pretty cool. That's also why all of the other controls are ambidextrous. So the charging handle is in the center, the safety is located on both sides, and the magazine release is also ambidextrous. Right down there. Push it in, pull the magazine out. This uses slightly modified Beretta 92 magazines. You can see the catch down there for the heel release on a Beretta. These, however, are locking into this notch right there. And there's a second interesting feature to the magazine system here, where if I push that in, it's going to lock in place there, but it's actually, in this position, it's being held below the line of the bolt, so it won't feed from here. Instead, when you're ready to actually fire, you have to push it up one more notch, and that brings it up level to the bolt. This is actually kind of like, like the Webley self-loading 1913 pistols do this. Now, in the case of the Webley, that was done so you could single load the gun. In the case of the TS5, it's done because, apparently, most likely, having experience with Uzi submachine guns in South Africa and Rhodesia, which were not equipped with the ratcheting safety system, the Uzi developed quite a reputation as a dangerous gun, because if you dropped it on the back end of the gun, it could fire without pulling the trigger. And, well, the Israelis fixed that with the ratcheting safety, but that was never really applied in South Africa and Rhodesia. So instead, gun designers like Steele ended up with this kind of once bitten, twice shy attitude towards the potential for an open bolt gun to fire unintentionally. So that's why this system exists, most likely, as a safety mechanism. Up at the top here, we have a little tiny sort of carry handle assembly. This was the very first production TS5, or the first prototype TS5. On the later guns, this was actually extended back to here. The charging handle was reconfigured to look much like an AR-15, early AR-15 trigger style of charging handle. So later on on all the other ones, this configuration would be a bit different. And then it is sized and drilled so that it can take a typical AR-15 style of charging handle mount. So that's where your optic would go. There are no iron sights on this. And then we have a rather bulky forend here. It has a second piece of rail on it that would probably be for a light or a laser, or you could actually mount a forward optic there, which would be lower than this mount and actually probably work better. But that's not the main thing going on with the handguard. The main thing is this is actually an integral suppressor. So this is a big expansion chamber at the front that we can take off right there. And then this holds on the handguard. This is actually an aluminum casting. Presumably, had this ever gone into production, that would have been redesigned as something a little lighter weight. Then we have a retaining nut here. We can pull that off. And then the suppressor is in two parts. There's a series of baffles here as a single unitized stack. And then we have a wire mesh style of suppressor element in the back. And the entire barrel is just Swiss cheesed out with perforations. And the reason for this is to actually reduce the velocity of the ammunition. So typically with something like with 9mm, if you're shooting 115 grain ammo, it's going to be, if it's loaded standard, it's going to be supersonic. And no suppressor is able to prevent the sonic boom. So you're going to get a fair amount of noise from that. If you want to shoot truly very quiet or silently, you need to use heavier ammo, 147 grain or maybe 124 grain. What these perforations do is they actually kind of reduce this to about a 2-inch barrel and vent gas before the projectile has a chance to fully accelerate. So you can actually shoot 115 grain ammunition in this, high velocity. These holes will vent the pressure and actually prevent the bullet from ever reaching its full velocity potential. It remains subsonic and thus a lot quieter without you having to use specialized ammunition. So that's kind of cool. That's not something unique to the TS5 here, but it's a design that often is not implemented. Now, to disassemble it, there are 2 pins here. Actually, kind of a funny story. When Steele left the Rhodesian Army at the end of his military career, he stole only one thing, and that was a bag of G3 push pins. And that's what are used on the TS5 here. So if I pull out that pin, with the rear pin and the magazine removed, you can now actually slide the upper receiver forward and pivot it open to remove the bolt. This front pinhole is slotted to allow you to do that. So that's clever. Here, pull that out. And then if you just want to remove the whole thing, you can pull the front pin like so, and then the 2 receiver halves completely separate. Now the bolt assembly is supposed to look like this. Unfortunately, this piece was soldered on here and it has broken off. So pretend that that's always on there. This is your ejection port cover, because when the bolt's in the gun, it's in either this alignment or this alignment. I'm going to put this off to the side now. There are sear engagement surfaces both here and here, symmetrical on both sides of the bolt. And then you can see the extractor is mounted right on exactly in the center, as is the ejector. Because this fires from an open bolt, it has a fixed firing pin. And what this allows you to do is you can insert this into the gun like this, or you can flip it over like that and choose which side you want it to eject out of. And that's kind of cool. This is really a completely ambidextrous gun. The recoil spring is also captive inside this assembly. So when the bolt cycles, this goes forward. There's the ejector built into the spring guide. So yeah, there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of clever stuff going on inside this gun. The lower assembly is an aluminum casting. Again, had this gone into production, this would have been replaced by probably a stamped sheet metal assembly, something that is more easily done in mass production. And aluminum casting is much easier to tinker with and tweak in development. And then we have a sear here and a disconnector. And if I pull the trigger without the grip safety, the sear can't move. That also prevents the bolt from dropping when it's not supposed to. If the bolt comes back far enough, well, it can't pass the sear without the grip safety locked, and once it's locked, it can't go forward without the grip safety being depressed. Once I do depress that, then, and put it in the fire position, then the sear drops and there's a disconnector in there so that it only fires semi-auto. A lot of people think that in Rhodesia and South Africa, guns like this were submachine guns. They were full auto. The vast majority of them were not, because gun control laws in those countries were very restrictive of fully automatic firearms. So guns like this are almost always semi-auto, although they often are semi-auto firing from an open bolt. We can also take a look at the stock. It's of course a folding stock design. Push the button down in order to fold it over. Once you do, it has a catch right here, and that locks onto this hook on the upper receiver. So the stock stays locked in the folded position until you push that button up and lift it off the hook. And then of course, once it's in this position, it's locked until you press this button down. Alrighty, I am curious how well this suppressor actually works. So we have loaded this up with some 115 grain supersonic FMJ, and we'll see how loud it is. Can this actually get rid of the supersonic crack? So I also have it in the safe mode with the magazine in the bottom mag catch. So now we're hot. This is semi-auto from an open bolt. Grip safety, manual safety is in fire. All the safety is ready to go. Almost works right. Oh, magazine catch wasn't. All right. That's still actually kind of snappy and loud. The suppressor helps, but it doesn't completely quiet it. I would say that's right on the borderline of being hearing safe.
There you go.
Ah, that is actually a magazine issue. There we go. And we're out of ammo. So Tommy Steele had some interesting ideas. Actually, you know what? You can't really fault him for the execution on this because it's the very first gun. So I will say this aluminum handguard is already starting to get hot. I think you would definitely want a beefier, a more actual suppressor. So despite the size of the handguard, there's actually not that much suppressor functionality in it. A lot of this is wall thickness of the aluminum and extra space at the bottom here for venting. So some neat ideas in this carbine, but it still had a ways to go, and well, and it never got that extra development. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. It's almost literally a one-of-a-kind gun, certainly one of 5, and this is the only of the TS5s that actually has this configuration and the integral silencer to it. So a very cool gun to take a look at. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.